Hi everyone, this is Mark Brower with a video about communication. So in these videos I talk about mental health and the spiritual life and how they intersect. One of the aspects of our lives that can really make our lives so much better and conversely so much worse is how we handle conflicts, differences of opinion, what to do when people hurt us, when they do things that we don't understand that tick us off. And the way that we process that can either make our lives a lot better or can make our lives a lot worse. Now, I talked about this in our church just recently, and I talked about this in terms of a commitment to loving communication. And I also used the term to nonviolent communication. And that's actually the title of a book and kind of a movement in psychology. The commitment to nonviolent communication. Marshall Rosenberg is the guy, I think, who actually coined that phrase, trademarked that phrase, wrote a book about it. There's a lot of other things being written about it. I'm actually going to put a summary or a link to a summary in the notes below the video here, where you can read more about nonviolent communication. And it's a little more developed than I'm going to go into here in this video, but it's good to have that. But I bring it up because I love that concept, right? I mean, I think most all of us are committed to nonviolence in our relationships, where if we have a problem with a friend of ours or a family member, we're not going to just beat them up. We're going to find a way to work through that without resorting to violence, right? That's what being a part of a civilized society is all about. But what Rosenberg said is the reality is many of us have traded physical violence for verbal violence, and we really hurt other people with our words, and we damage relationships. And once things have been said, they can't be unsaid. And so, again, in family relationships, marriage relationships, we see so much hurt happening because of how people say things in the heat of the moment. They're not able to or willing to figure out how to handle their emotions and the frustrations that they have. That also happens in spiritual communities and churches as well. And I would say maybe even more common is that because we don't know how to deal with conflict or handle it well, how to have confrontational conversations in a way that's not destructive, right? Because we suck at that so bad, we don't do it. If someone says something or does something that hurts us, we're afraid to deal with it, so we just stuff it. We hold back, and then we don't process that with them, and our relationship then stalls out. It's difficult to go deeper in a relationship because that thing is in the way, and sometimes it then, really can deteriorate from there. And of course, this is all complicated in our world today with social media and digital interaction, where we can just, let it all hang out at the typewriter, or at our keyboard, and we can wind up writing some really offensive things, or even things that aren't terribly offensive but get blown up and blown out of proportion and taken out of context, because writing and texting is not a medium that works well for confrontation and difficult conversation. So we have this difficult, or this really unfortunate track record, especially lately, of having a really hard time dealing with differences in conflict. So how do we do that? I'm going to give you another link, another resource to check out. The book is called Fierce Conversations. I think the author is Susan Scott, and the link I'm going to give you is a summary of the main points of that. It's similar to nonviolent communication, but it's really more oriented towards the business context or organizations. Nonviolent communication is a little bit more psychologically focused on connecting to your feelings and sharing your feelings and needs. And Fierce Conversations is maybe a little bit less touchy-feely, if you will, but but it does get to the root of what's happening inside. And there's, no matter what, we're going to have, there's going to be some amount of vulnerability that we have to be willing to open ourselves up when we have these conversations about how what someone has said or done affects us, how it hurts us, how it makes our life difficult, right? So anyway, you can check out those resources and read up more on those if you'd like. But I just want to share a quick 3-point process as far as, how we would go about having this kind of conversation. So I was a part of a community some years ago that they actually challenged us that if we had a problem with someone, we had to talk to them. And they gave us a worksheet. And the worksheet had 3 statements, and then we would fill in the blank, so to speak, right? With our own particular issue, how we would experience things. And then we would have to sit down with the person and go through that worksheet with them. And, there would be opportunity for questions and, clear up any misunderstandings. And maybe we would walk away from that realizing that we heard it or understood it or interpreted it all wrong, or maybe the other person would hear what we had to say and then apologize and work to make amends. It could happen in a variety of ways, but the point is, there's a technology or there's a tool we could use to have this conversation with someone, and then, of course, have the guts to do it instead of just covering things over and having relationships deteriorate. Okay, so here it is, very simply. When you fill in the blank, and what you're saying is when the other person, when they said something or when they did something, then what happened for me is, or how I experienced that was, I think Marshall Rosenberg said, when you, his model, the nonviolent communication model, is when you X, Y, or Z, that made me feel such and such, and maybe it's not even necessarily about a particular emotional thing, but when you said this or when you did this, how I interpreted that or how that affected me was, and then you fill in the blank there. And then the third thing is what I would like from you in the future, or what I need from you is, and then you describe that, or again, fill in the blank there. That's as simple. That's all you need to do. And now I want to point out a couple of things. Probably one of the most important things about this kind of conversation is that when you say, when you point out what the other person did or said or whatever, you're very specific. You don't generalize. You always talk bad about me in front of your friends, or whatever, or you don't make judgments about what the person is doing. You make it sound like you hate my job, and then, because what'll happen is, if you make judgments about what they did or generalizations about what they did, then they're going to come back to you and argue about that. Now you're off to the races with a debate about whether your judgment of what they did is correct or your analysis of the generalization is correct. No, don't even go there. Just say very specifically what was the specific thing. Okay, so you're very specific about what you're pointing to. And then you also, this is the vulnerability part, where you're saying, this is how it affected me. This is how it was damaging, how it was hurtful, or how it was confusing, or whatever. Okay? And then the final part of it is, of course, then you would ask them to do something different in the future. You would make a request of how they would respond in the future. Now, at some point in that conversation, hopefully, they might have a chance to speak up and help you understand what they were thinking, or maybe apologize. And, again, how they take it and how they respond to it is a separate issue, and that's kind of ultimately not your responsibility. You can make a decision then about how they respond and then move on from there. But at least you've offered the chance. You've opened the door to the possibility of the relationship, being renewed and restored. So I invite you to make that commitment, to commit to that process. Whether you call it a nonviolent communication, a fierce conversation, a conversation where you are open with someone about what they did and how it was hurtful to you, and then ask them to do something different in the future. And if you do that, I believe that will massively, here's the counterintuitive thing, it will massively reduce your stress and depression levels. Now, of course, it will increase your stress before you're having that conversation and while you're having that conversation. But what many of us find is that it's the buildup to that conversation where we're wondering and worrying and fretting, and then we're getting worked up, right? So as quick as you can, rather than live with all that internal chaos and stress and confusion and trying to have these make-up conversations in your head about what you want to say to tell them off, forget all of that. Just have the conversation with them. Have the nonviolent, the loving conversation where you say, when you blank, then what happened for me, how I experienced that was blank, and what I'd like for you in the future is blank, and see what happens. All right, have a great week.